If one of them asked me, why is this wrong? And I said out of scope, they wouldn't be very happy because I wouldn't have been going into enough depth. The answer choice could be extreme in a certain way. It could be reversing something in a certain way, but regardless, it's irrelevant and not covered by the stimulus for one specific reason or another. And I believe that developing a solid understanding of the wide varieties of ways a choice can be outside the scope is the key to deepening your understanding of why a wrong answer choice is wrong, and then therefore avoiding it. There are a couple of questions that come to mind where I think like these are examples of things that seemed outside the scope but weren't. So let's say one of my favorite questions, it's from PrepTest 30, the rattlesnake folktale question. And let me know if I'm getting too much into specifics here, but the correct answer choice involves something that was not specifically mentioned in the stimulus, but it was still relevant because it was dismissing a potential problem with the reasoning contained within the argument. So it might seem out of scope because it was not directly stated, yet it was still relevant to the reasoning. So that was not outside the scope, although it was not directly mentioned. In contrast, I think a lot of times something could be outside the scope for a reason as simple as that it's too extreme. So if the stimulus was referring to sometimes or most of the time, and the conclusion said always or never, that's too strong. And because it's too strong, it's technically, yes, it's outside the scope. It goes beyond. I don't really like to use it at all, honestly. My rattlesnake folktale example, and it's like from test 30 if anyone wants to look it up, but the point is that the specifics of the correct answer choice are not mentioned in the stimulus. And so students will think that this was out of scope, when instead, due to the fact that when considered in the context of the stimulus, it actually does relate. It is actually not outside the scope, and it actually is necessary in order for the argument to work. I would not actually use the terms. If the student had been using materials from a prep company where that was a common phrase, I might allow them to use that phrase in our conversations. But my explanation and my terminology would say the degree of certainty is too strong. Sometimes versus always does not line up. And so the degree of certainty is the reason that a particular answer choice might be wrong. We could talk a bit about the various reasons why a given logical reasoning answer choice might be wrong. Another one I often talk about is the category of what's being discussed. Oftentimes in the stimulus, they'll qualify the group they're discussing. So they'll say, all people who wear yellow hats. And then if the answer choice said all people in general, that would be going too far. And some might say that's going outside the scope, but I would say that's going beyond the category of what they were discussing in the stimulus. The stimulus qualified all people with the limitation, those who wear yellow hats, whereas the answer choice is making a claim about all people in general. And an example where this might come up would be, let's say there was a study involving specifically senior citizens in one region between these ages, and then the conclusion of that study goes farther than that to discuss all people in general. And that's also, of course, a methodological study flaw. But specifically, they're also going, quote unquote, outside the scope by broadening their claim to people beyond those directly mentioned, or the type of people those directly mentioned. There's almost too many to list, and I don't think it would be even useful for us to try and list them all. I think it's really up to students when they're reviewing to look for patterns in wrong answer choices and really force themselves to specifically say, what is making this answer choice wrong? And over time, as you do this, you'll start to see those patterns and start to see the tricks the test makers are using in order to tempt you into choosing something that's incorrect and something that is, quote unquote, outside the scope. Articulating this, writing out your review process, you're analyzing your thought patterns, but actually forcing yourself to write it down to really articulate for yourself in your own words why something is wrong, not to just look at the correct answer and say, oh, I get it now. How could I have been so dumb before?